Congratulating the new president-elect. Let me just read a section of that. As the closest of allies, says Mr. Starmer, we stand shoulder to shoulder in defence of our shared values of freedom, democracy and enterprise. From growth and security to innovation and tech, I know that the UK-US special relationship will continue to prosper on both sides of the Atlantic for years to come. Well, Carl, Mr. Starmer fulfilling the first foreign policy duty of any British Prime Minister, which is to use the phrase special relationship as often as possible. Where is the special relationship today, do you think?
Well, on one hand, it looks quite tricky. Actually, on both hands, it looks quite tricky. On the one hand, because both Keir Starmer and David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, have said pretty disobliging things about Donald Trump. I mean, David Lammy called him a tyrant in a toupee. And also said he was not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi, sympathising sociopath, but also a profound threat to the international order. So, you know, that's a diplomatic road bump, perhaps. That said, both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary did go out of their way to build relationships with Team Trump before the election. The Prime Minister is one of the first world leaders to phone Donald Trump after the assassination attempt. David Lammy actually has a very good relationship going back some years with the Vice President nominee, J.D. Vance. So it's not quite as clear-cut as they've been rude about him in the past. Some people are suggesting that maybe David Lammy can't stay in his position now because of the things that he said. I mean, that is one way of looking at it, especially as his position is perceived as being weak by some in Westminster. The other way of looking at it is, well, hang on, the Prime Minister can't be seen to change his Foreign Secretary because it doesn't suit the man in the White House. So there are definitely two sides to that. The other thing of substance that I think is important to say is what Donald Trump does is going to be very important. Whether he introduces the tariffs that he's going to say and creates, you know, possibly, you know, some sort of world trade war, and what he does about Ukraine will be absolutely crucial.
Shihab, before I get your thoughts on this, I just want to play an exchange that our US correspondent Dan Rivers had with Donald Trump Jr. last week. Have a listen to this.
The British Labour Party accused of interfering in this election. Will that damage the special relationship?
It's certainly not a great start because it's clear what they're doing, and it's absolute lunacy what I see what's going on in the UK right now when they're jailing people for misgendering someone. I mean, it's honestly, it's disgusting, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
It was unfortunate, wasn't it, Shihab, the timing of that, the visit by Labour Party people out to join in with the Kamala Harris campaign. What conversations do you think are being had in Downing Street today?
Yeah, as Carl said, as road bumps go, that was quite a significant one. The fact there was a social media post from a member of staff of the Labour Party saying that they had spaces available to go to the United States for former or current Labour Party staff members or Labour members to go and campaign for Kamala Harris. At the time, Keir Starmer was adamant that this wasn't something that was being centrally organised by the Labour Party, had nothing to do with him. He said it was quite normal practice for people in their spare time to go campaign for whichever party they saw fit. Of course, the Democrats are politically the sister party of the Labour Party, but the fact that the Trump campaign not only picked up on it, but actually put in a formal complaint is a worry, and I've spoken to a number of people within government who've said that the reason why this is such a concern is because they're aware that the Trump administration, and Donald Trump in particular, is the type of politician that can hold a grudge, that he won't forget about this. It's something that could come up in the future. But work has been going on for quite some time to build relationships with the Republicans from even before that moment. We saw when Keir Starmer was out in the US, he had that dinner with Donald Trump where the two spoke. We've seen that the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who, as Carl mentioned, has got a bit of a history of posting things about Donald Trump on his social media that aren't exactly the most flattering. Well, he's been in the US a fair bit, and he's been meeting with J.D. Vance. He's been talking to a number of senior Republicans in Washington to try and build those relationships. Mr. Lammy himself has been saying he's actually got quite a lot in common with J.D. Vance. He thinks there's someone that they can work together. In Downing Street, the only thing they'll be talking about from this moment onwards is how can they build a relationship with the Trump administration that puts all those things to aside. They can move move past the so-called claim of election interference. They can move past the comments that have been made previously. Remember, J.D. Vance himself had been critical of Donald Trump in the past. So it's clear that you can rebuild a relationship there, because ultimately the relationship between the UK and the US is so important when it comes to a number of foreign policy issues. And Keir Starmer will know he needs to work with Donald Trump if he's going to be an effective world leader.
I should just add as well that, contrary to what Donald Trump Jr. was saying in that clip, no one, as far as we're aware, in the UK has been jailed for misgendering anyone. Before we go over to the chamber, I just want to quickly discuss Kemi Badenoch's debut. Carl, some people thrive at the dispatch box, some people crumble. What's your feeling for how the new Tory party leader is going to get on?
Well, I mean, it's a big moment whenever a new leader steps forward to the dispatch box on either side, and it's often something that, you know, goes down in history as their first big moment. She is a combative performer. You would expect her to be one of the ones that thrives. You know, this is the arena where many people think she can do very well, particularly against Keir Starmer, who isn't as forthright a speaker and, you know, perhaps isn't as good a communicator as she is. So it will be fascinating to see how they start lining up against each other, you know, going head to head, because it will set the tone for these confrontations for years probably to come, and possibly into the next election. Yeah,
this is what our politics are going to look like for the next 4 or 5 years. Shihab, what are you looking forward to from today's session?
Look, this is going to be a very different experience for Keir Starmer. He's got a lot of experience at PMQs because he's been leader of the opposition and now Prime Minister. But this is different because as leader of the opposition, he was asking the questions and it was different Prime Ministers answering them. As Prime Minister, he's been facing a Rishi Sunak who lost an election, who's been taking a slightly different approach because fundamentally he's no longer the Prime Minister. It's a very different attitude to the one that Kemi Badenoch is going to have. As Carl says, she's very combative. She's going to be taking a very different tone to Rishi Sunak. And this is going to be the first time that Keir Starmer is really put under pressure in that combative sort of way at PMQs because he's not faced that before. So it's going to be a challenge for him. But it's also going to be a challenge for Kemi Badenoch. It's her first time doing this. It's not easy stepping up to the dispatch box when you know there is a lot of pressure riding on it, when everyone in Westminster thinks this is where you should excel. So all eyes are going to be on Kemi Badenoch to see what questions she asks and how she delivers them.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Expectations are high for her performance on her side, and that's not an easy place to be starting from.
I just want to touch quickly on the business of being an opposition, Carl, because the Tories have so few MPs. In the appointments that she's made this week, Carl, Kemi Badenoch has been somewhat restricted in the kind of amount of opposition that she can supply, just because it's a numbers game. I think Mr. Starmer's appointed 124 government posts, has he? I mean, the Tories just can't match that because they don't have enough MPs.
No, I mean, it is the main front benchers that are the key people. You know, the shadow minister for paper clips isn't someone that often gets much attention anyway, to be perfectly honest with you. So it is the shadow team, which she has tried to some extent to make quite broad and to include people who were willing to serve with her, who were not, I mean, Robert Jenrick, obviously, people who were not on her side during the leadership. Others like Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly decided that they didn't want to be on her front bench. So she is trying, it seems, to bring the party together. Some interesting, eye-catching appointments, I think you could say, with Chris Philp in the Shadow Home Office role and Priti Patel in the Shadow Foreign Office role. We'll see how they do.
And broadly, just touching on Mrs. Badenoch's, I should say, cabinet appointments, shadow cabinet appointments, she's tried to cast the net fairly widely across the political spectrum in her party, hasn't she?
Yeah, this was billed as a shadow cabinet that's designed to try and unite the party. The thing we've learned about the Conservative Party over years and years and years is that they are not afraid of infighting and they're not afraid of taking on leaders. And this appears to be her attempt to try and make sure that both rivals are within her shadow cabinet as well as allies, different parts of the party represented. But she's also leaving behind a lot of experience on the backbenches, admittedly, because a lot of senior figures have said that they don't want to serve in the shadow cabinet. They think it's time for a fresh set of faces. But there are former chancellors, there are former home secretaries, former foreign secretaries, all sitting, former prime ministers as well, I should say, all sitting on the backbenches. So there's a lot of experience and support there if she needs it. But again, look, who would write off the Tories fighting each other again, whether it's in 6 months or a year's time? And although the shadow cabinet is designed to stop that from happening, if history teaches us one thing, is that they're not afraid to start bickering with each other when the time's right.
OK, Shihab, I'll stop you there. Let's go over to the chamber.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by congratulating President-elect Trump on his historic election victory. As the closest of allies, the UK and US will continue to work together to protect our shared values of freedom and democracy. And having had dinner with President-elect Trump just a few weeks ago, I look forward to working with him in the years to come. May I also welcome the Leader of the Opposition to her place, my fourth Tory leader in 4.5 years. But I do look forward to working with her in the interests of the British public. Mr. Speaker, this weekend is Remembrance Sunday, and people across the country will come together to pay solemn tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice, defending the values and freedoms that we enjoy today. And I'm sure the entire House will join me in paying tribute to them. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dame Caroline.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Susan is going to miss out on her winter fuel allowance this winter because she's just £10 above the pension credit threshold. So as well as losing out on this vital money to keep her house warm, she also doesn't get the £150 warm home discount. She doesn't get the £169 free TV licence or free NHS prescriptions. For the sake of a tenner, Prime Minister, is this fair?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we passed a budget which was to fix the foundations of this country and to rebuild our country. And one of the issues we had to confront was the £22 billion black hole that was left by the last government. We've taken the tough decisions. That will stabilise our economy. That means we can commit to the triple lock, and that means that pensioners will be better off seeing the increase in their pension they would have been under the party opposite.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every week I meet hard-working families in Burton and Uttoxeter who are juggling raising their children and their family finances. When they hear the party opposite and its new leader say that maternity pay has gone too far, they are terrified about what this means for them. To ease the worry felt by thousands of hard-working families, can the Prime Minister please commit that he has no plans to change maternity pay or to roll back the hard-won rights of working families?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. He's a champion for families in his constituency. My answer is simple, yes. And I don't agree with the Leader of the Opposition when she says that maternity pay is excessive and that it's gone too far.
I come to the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his almost warm welcome? And can I also echo the comments that he has made? It is an immense privilege and the honour of my life to lead the Conservative Party. And I look forward to joining him at the Cenotaph this Remembrance Sunday. As Leader of His Majesty's Opposition, I will be taking a different approach to the last opposition by being a constructive opposition. And so I would like to start by congratulating President-elect Trump on his impressive victory this morning. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary met him in September. Did the Foreign Secretary take that opportunity to apologise for making derogatory and scatological references, including, and I quote, Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, he is also a profound threat to the international order. And if he did not apologise, will the Prime Minister do so now on his behalf?
Mr. Speaker, there will be many issues on which the Leader of the Opposition and I disagree, but there will be issues that do unite this House on national security and Ukraine, and I do look forward to working closely with her on that, and I will provide her with the information that she needs to discharge her duties. That's the right thing for the country, and it's far more important than party politics. The Foreign Secretary and I did meet President-elect Trump just a few weeks ago for dinner for about a couple of hours, and we discussed a number of issues of global significance. It was a very constructive exercise.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister did not distance himself from the remarks made by the Foreign Secretary, and I'm very sure that President Trump will soon be calling to thank him for sending all of those North London Labour activists to campaign for his opponent. Given that most of his cabinet signed a motion to ban President Trump from addressing Parliament, will the Prime Minister show that he and his government can be more than student politicians by asking the Speaker to extend? Can they show that they can be more than student politicians?
Order. Mr. Perkins, I don't need to anymore. Your voice carries, it's like mine, too loud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister show that he and his government can be more than student politicians by asking you, Mr. Speaker, to extend an invitation to President Trump to address Parliament on his next visit?
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is giving a masterclass on student politics. But seriously, Mr. Speaker, we live in probably a more volatile world than we've lived in for many decades. It is absolutely crucial that we have a strong relationship, that strong special relationship forged in difficult circumstances between the US and the UK. We will continue to work, as we have done in the 4 months in government, on issues of security, our economy and global conflict.
Mr. Speaker, he does not answer the questions, just read the lines the officials have prepared for him. It doesn't sound like he wants to invite President-elect Trump to Parliament. He needs to look after the special relationship. The US is our single biggest trade partner. Given the risk of increased tariffs on UK exports, which threaten our manufacturing sector, will the Prime Minister commit now to continue the negotiations on our free trade agreement with the US, which the Biden administration cancelled when they came into office?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we will discuss issues of our economy with the President-elect, as we already have done. Economy, security and global conflict are issues of real significance that ought to unite this House. But when it comes to the economy, what we've done with our budget is to fix the foundations after 14 years. Return to economic stability of the £23 million black hole. We've protected the pay slips of working people. We've done the single biggest investment in our country for a generation in the NHS, in schools and homes. We've given a pay rise to the 3 million lowest paid. Now, if she's opposed to that investment or the pay rise for working people, she's a straight talker as I understand it, perhaps she should say so.
Mr. Speaker, discuss, chat. He has no plans whatsoever. No plans whatsoever for building on the special relationship. He needs to realise that we in this country rely on our single biggest trade partner. President Trump is also right to argue that Europe needs to increase its defence spending. The last Conservative government committed to raising defence spending to 2.5% by 2030. Will the Prime Minister finally match this commitment?
Mr. Speaker, there is no more important duty than keeping the people of this country safe. And it was the Labour government that signed the NATO treaty in the first place, and we are strong supporters. We have a strategic defence review. We are committed to 2.5%. Well, I would remind the last time 2.5 was met was under the last Labour government. 14 years, and they never did it once. Last year, the NAO identified a £17 billion black hole in the MOD finances. The former Defence Secretary said the previous government hollowed out the armed forces, and the plan they put forward at the election was pure fantasy.
Kevin Bevel.
Mr. Speaker, he will not make that commitment. That is very clear. All that he is doing,
I'm going to hear the questions. If the people who don't want to hear it, they can leave now. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, he will not make that commitment, and yet the world is getting more dangerous. His Chancellor's budget did not even mention defence. The Chancellor's budget last week was a copy and paste of Bidenomics. It turns out that a high-spending, high-borrowing, high-inflation approach is less popular than she may have thought. May I suggest he now urge her to change course, or is he determined to be a one-term leader?
The one thing I learned as Leader of the Opposition is it's a good idea to listen to what the government is actually saying. I think she just said that defence wasn't mentioned in the budget. It was 7 days ago that it was absolutely clear and central to the budget, as was economic growth. We are fixing the foundations. We're giving a pay rise to millions of people. We're picking up the mess that they left, 22 billion, and a tax rise and a pay rise for working people. And I haven't heard yet her welcome that pay rise for the 3 million lowest paid workers. Does she now welcome it? Does she stick to her previous policy that it's excessive?
Mr. Speaker, I was the one who raised the minimum wage last year as Business Secretary. I have a strong record on this, but we need to make sure that we balance the books. His scripted lines are showing that he has not even listened to the budget himself. So I will try a different question. Perhaps he can give something that is unscripted to the people watching. Farmers across the United Kingdom... Mr. Speaker... Mr. Speaker... Mr.
Order! I don't need any help. Can I just say, if somebody wants to leave, I'll be helping them do that. I'm going to hear the question, and I certainly want to hear the answer as well. So please, let's have some courtesy.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard him repeat the lines on the television, fixing the foundations and so on. But what does he say, over and over again, but what does he say to farmers who are facing uncertainty about their futures as a result of the increased taxes announced by the Chancellor? I am very clear that we would reverse Labour's cruel family farms tax. What can he say now to reassure the farming community, who provide security for the whole nation?
Prime Minister.
I'm happy to help the Leader of the Opposition. If she's going to complain about scripted answers, it's probably best not to read that from a script. What I will say about farmers is this. I'm glad she's raised farmers, because the budget last week put £5 billion over the next 2 years into farming. That's the single biggest increase, unlike the £300 million, which was an underspend under the last government. And when it comes to inheritance, the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected, as she well knows, as they well know. But that budget was about fixing the foundations, fixing the whole 22 billion that they left, and investing in the future of our country, investing in our NHS, investing in our schools, our hospitals and our homes. And I'm proud that that's the investment work. And if they oppose it, they should go out there and tell their constituents they're against that investment in the future of our country. That's the difference. A Labour government taking us forward. They're stuck in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to hear Matthew Patrick.
Mr. Speaker, Emily left her ex, but the abuse did not stop. He stayed in their home, cancelled the mortgage contributions and destroyed her credit score. Now she cannot even take out a mobile phone contract. Surviving economic abuse and UK finance have made progress tackling this issue, but more has to be done. Will the Prime Minister and his government work with me to introduce new provisions so that we can restore the credit files for survivors of economic abuse like Emily?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this really important issue, because economic abuse has a devastating impact on victims, leaving them vulnerable and isolated. And we are committed to ending this national emergency and keeping women safe from domestic abuse, harassment and stalking. And, Mr. Speaker, that includes £200 1,000 this year to the charity Surviving Economic Abuse, and HMRC have launched an online tool to help charities and businesses identify and respond to economic abuse. And I'll make sure he has a meeting with the relevant minister.
Leader of the Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about Remembrance Sunday? We must always remember the brave British men and women who gave their lives for our country. And can I join him in welcoming the Conservative leader to her place? And can I congratulate her on becoming the first black leader of a UK-wide party, a major and historic achievement? Mr. Speaker, President-elect Trump praised Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and I quote, he called it genius. He also said he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to NATO allies. So what action is the Prime Minister taking to encourage a Trump presidency to change its mind? Because otherwise it's a huge threat to global security and to national security in the UK. Does he agree with me that the US will not oppose President Putin and support our brave Ukrainian allies? The UK must lead in Europe so that together we do.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that in this House we are united on the question of Ukraine and clear about Russian aggression, and we will continue to do so. I've long taken the view that the only winner, if we are divided in this House, is Putin, and I'm not prepared to let that happen. Our relationship with the US is a strong relationship forged in very difficult circumstances historically. It remains as strong today as it was when it was first forged, and I look forward to working with President-elect Trump to ensure that relationship stays the special relationship.
Sir Ed Davey.
I'm grateful for the Prime Minister's comments on Ukraine, but Donald Trump has also said that trade wars are good. He calls himself tariff man. People are really worried that Trump trade wars and tariff will damage our economy, damage businesses, and hit the cost of living here in the UK. So, given this, does the Prime Minister recognise that it's more urgent than ever that we support our British economy by getting rid of the damaging trade barriers with Europe put in place by the Conservatives?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as he will know, we've put the economy centrepiece to our budget, and we will do everything that we need to do to ensure our economy grows, and that's measured in living standards going up for working people across the country. Thank you.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are so many families across Aldershot and Farnborough who have struggled for years to get their children the need they help with special educational needs. It is therefore shameful to read misguided claims that autistic people may well get better treatment and receive economic privileges and protections made by the Leader of the Opposition. Will the Prime Minister stand with families of autistic children and distance this government from those awful words?
Mr. Speaker, I'll leave the Leader of the Opposition to respond to those words. As the recent NAO report exposed, under the previous government, children with SEND were being failed by the system, and this has come up, I think, now 5 times in the last 2 or 3 weeks at PMQs. It's clearly a serious issue. Our focus will be ensuring every child receives the right support to succeed in their education.
Sir Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, Northern Ireland is considered one of the most dangerous places in Europe to be a woman. In the last 4 years, 24 women have been killed. But one of the most dangerous places for women and girls is online. I also want to pay tribute to the work of Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid, who are tireless in their advocacy for women. So what is this government doing to keep women and girls safe online, not just in Lagan Valley, but right across the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Well, the right honourable member is right to draw attention to this issue. Misogyny and abuse, both online and offline, causes horrendous harm to women and girls across the UK. And can I commend her honesty and bravery in speaking out about her own experiences and her dedication to creating safe spaces for women in her constituency. We must create a safer world online for women and girls through the Online Safety Act, mitigating the risk of illegal content and activity which is abusive or incites hatred.
Bill Coyle.
Everyone in Southwark will benefit from the positive measures in the budget last week, especially the thousands on the minimum wage, getting a real terms increase to help themselves, to help their families and help the economy. But the new leader of the Tory party, this week's leader, is on record as saying she wants to scrap it, having seemingly learnt nothing from July. Will the Prime Minister pledge to protect the minimum wage and increase it in this Parliament as finances allow?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the last Labour government transformed the labour market with the national minimum wage, something which was opposed by the party opposite at the time. And sadly, they don't seem to have changed. I was surprised by the comments of the Leader of the Opposition. I was surprised to see the new Shadow Business Secretary say the minimum wage, and this is a quote, something legislators pass to make themselves feel good. I disagree, and I'm very proud of the fact that this Labour government has raised wages for 3 million of low-paid workers, and I expect the party opposite to welcome that.
George Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 14 years shaping the UK's long-term strategies for life science, agri-tech, fusion and space, I welcome the government's industrial strategy. But too many of our great companies are being bought out by our competitors. To build the industries of tomorrow here, we need to unlock some of the hundreds of billions in UK pension funds in the city, only 3% of which are now investing in UK equities. With the new Lord Mayor making this a priority and the Mansion House speech imminent, will the new government commit to see through the last government's reforms to unlock British capital for British R&D growth?
Well, I thank him for welcoming the industrial strategy, and I do know this is an issue close to his heart that he has spoken about and acted on for many years. The budget sees record numbers of R&D investment, with over 20 billion next year, including over 2 billion to support our world-leading life sciences sector. And through the British Growth Partnership, we'll crowd in pension funds investment to support innovative business. And we've launched our landmark pensions review to unlock the billions of investment into the UK and boost growth and living standards across the country. Thank you.
Catherine Brooks.
Mr. Speaker, as the Chancellor said last week, we were left a legacy by the previous government, including rivers filled with polluted waste. Will the Prime Minister put the River Wye into special measures by designating it a water protection zone? And will he meet with me and the excellent cross-border Wye Catchment Partnership to deliver their plan to clean up the Wye?
Prime Minister.
The River Wye is one of our most important, iconic rivers, and we are working closely with the Welsh Government on this pressing issue. A destruction of our waterways should never have been allowed, and that's why we launched a Water Commission to attract investment and speed up infrastructure delivery. And we introduced legislation to enable tougher penalties and severe fines to crack down on polluters. I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Baron of the House to Edward Lee.
As a good lawyer, I know the Prime Minister will want to listen to the evidence. So if the evidence mounts from experts in organisations such as the NFU that smaller family farms of average size, 250 acres, are going to be severely impacted by this tax, in a spirit of compromise, will he listen to the evidence, keep an open mind, and perhaps be prepared to raise the thresholds to preserve our family farms?
Mr. Speaker, we are listening to farmers, and the Environment Secretary and the Treasury Ministers met with the NFU on Monday of this week. We have taken a fair and balanced approach. The vast majority of farms will not be affected by this. But what I will also say this, having grown up in a rural community, I know that rural communities also need an NHS that's back on its feet. They also need schools that their children can go to and homes that their families can afford to live in. But we will continue to talk to the NFU and others.
Linda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Leader of the Opposition told us that any outrage at suitcases full of wine and karaoke machines in Downing Street, whilst people across the country were told to stay at home, was all overblown. For the people and businesses in my constituency who followed the rules, many of us at great personal cost, this is an insult. Will the Prime Minister join me in ensuring that as a country we learn the lessons from COVID, and as a party the Conservatives learn the lessons of their behaviour too?
Mr. Speaker, across the country, people made enormous sacrifices during COVID. They missed weddings, births, deaths, really important moments in their lives and their families' lives. In doing so, they saved the lives of people they will probably never meet. That was a collective effort, and unfortunately, the party opposite who set the rules did not follow them themselves. It was a betrayal of those that did. And I think the Leader of the Opposition was wrong to describe the public anger and upset as overblown. I'm sure she'll want to clarify that at the first opportunity.
Cyfarwydd, Glan Horse Nursing Home is in my constituency in Ysmôn. Tell me that the budget changes mean a 10% increase in their cost. That's a staggering £127,500 extra in-year cost. Will the Prime Minister reconsider the rise in the employer's national insurance?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we did in the budget last week was to ensure that no one would face tax rises in their pay slip. We had to deal with the £22 billion black hole, but when we did so, we protected the smallest businesses and charities. We doubled the employment allowance to £10,500. That means that 40% of employers won't pay employers' NICs. Companies with 4 employees or less on a minimum wage will pay no employer NICs at all, and half of businesses that pay NICs will see no change or pay less after the budget. Thank you.
Phil Brickle.
My constituents in Bolton West were pleased to hear last week's budget prioritise investment in public infrastructure, including important projects such as the electrification of the Wigan to Bolton railway line, which will deliver more reliable and greener journeys. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that investment in the key infrastructure of towns such as Horwich, West Horton, Blackrod and Bolton is the only way to deliver economic growth and prosperity for all?
Prime Minister. Well, my honourable friend is a champion for the North West, and the budget secured investment for vital transport projects to transform connectivity across the north of England and drive economic growth. And that includes completing the Wigan to Bolton electrification, a really important momentum on the Northern Powerhouse Rail. Over £5 billion to support everyday journeys for working people. By restoring economic stability, increasing investment, we're taking our country forward.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Swan Youth Project in Berkhamsted is an incredible drop-in centre that intervenes to bring hope and a better future to teenagers like Lex and Megan who've been facing anxiety, depression and long mental health waiting lists, as well as families coping with SEND. They've already written to the Treasury saying that they're worried about getting the funds that they need as our communities face a tough winter and grants are depleting. Parole, the manager, also assures me that she makes a mean curry and would welcome the Prime Minister. So will the Prime Minister join me to discuss their concerns and ensure that organisations in the third sector like theirs get the support that they need as they work tirelessly for our communities?
Prime Minister.
She'll be pleased now. I've been to Berkhamsted a number of times. We've got very good friends who live there. And I want to pay tribute to the work of the Swan Youth Project, because too many young people, she's cited some, are struggling with mental health and not receiving the support that they need. And that's why we will recruit an additional 8,500 mental health workers and are introducing reforms to the Mental Health Act, long overdue, and that's happening today. Of course, we will also put more money into SEND, but we also need to look at reforming SEND, something that I think and hope will be supported across this House, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant ministers about that.
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, will know that after 14 years of Tory ideological hostility and cuts, our universities are in financial meltdown. In my own constituency of Norwich South, the University of East Anglia is having having to make redundancies, as are many others. Our honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, has started to address the problem, but we need a longer-term solution that doesn't simply saddle more debt on our young people. So can my right honourable friend say how we can move to fix the foundations of higher education as we go forward?
Prime Minister.
That question is right to raise higher education, because we inherited a sector facing severe financial challenges. Universities have suffered real terms decline in their income, and the gap between disadvantaged students and their peers is the highest on record. We've had to take tough decisions to put that on a secure footing, but we are also taking the step of easing the living pressures by increasing the maintenance, which is worth £414 extra per year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Alex Brooke.
Hamilton, former sub-postmistress and constituent of North East Hampshire, has long been campaigning, along with Alan Bates, for compensation following the Horizon Post Office scandal. Can the Prime Minister give an exact time frame in which those who have been waiting over a decade might finally be compensated?
I'm grateful to her for raising this important issue, because a commitment was made to properly compensate the victims.
Why hasn't he removed the whip?
Prime Minister.
No, I don't.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a semi-retired violinist and rock musician asking a semi-retired multi-instrumentalist, I feel confident that the Prime Minister shares my belief in the importance of music education. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that as we unleash the potential of our country, we must invest in the educational infrastructure of creative arts subjects so that they're accessible to all? And will he visit my constituency to see the great work of the schools there, despite the inheritance we received?
Prime Minister.
I'm not sure about the description semi-retired, although that may be the wish of the party opposite. But on music, what I do know from personal experience is music, the creatives and art are really important for children and young people in terms of the pleasure it gives them, the knowledge, but the working in groups and the leadership. And that's why we are determined to ensure that they are counted subjects again within the curriculum, which will encourage many more schools to provide it within the curriculum and enrich the futures of children and young people across the country.
James Cleverly.
the election, he claimed that he would not put up national insurance contributions. He put it up. Before the election, he claimed he would scrap tuition fees. He put it up. Before the election, he said he would not tax family farms. He's taxing family farms. Will he address his party's growing reputation for dishonesty by making good on his commitment to close the Wethersfield Asylum Accommodation Centre in my constituency?
Mr. Speaker, we're keeping the promises we made in our manifesto. His problem is he can't add up. If he could add up, he might be down here rather than up there, and we'll take up the issue of his constituency.
Douglas McAllister!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monday of this week marked the 7-year anniversary of my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal's arbitrary detention in India. Can the Prime Minister assure me that he and his government will do all they can to secure his immediate release and bring him home?
Yes, we're absolutely committed to pushing the Government of India on this really important case. And the Foreign Secretary has raised it and will continue to do so, and we'll make sure that we speak to him as we do.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions.
Very well. She understood the assignment. She asked him a series of unanswerable questions. Will he apologise for what the Foreign Secretary said about the US President-elect? Will he invite Donald Trump to Parliament? Will he start free trade negotiations? When will he raise defence spending? All things that the Prime Minister, of course, couldn't answer or wouldn't want to answer there and then. And the Prime Minister replying with, the big picture, strategic stuff about fixing the foundation, serious stuff about talking to Donald Trump about national security and the economy. And that made him look evasive. And I thought she also delivered it all very well, very calmly, quite quietly. I mean, we may get fireworks in the months and years to come, but none today. I thought she did really well for her first go.
Yeah, she had. What was the quote you mentioned at the start that Mrs. Badenoch suggested that the government apologise for Donald Trump as a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath? What did you make of Mrs. Badenoch's opening attack lines?
Yeah, we know this is uncomfortable territory for Keir Starmer and his Foreign Secretary David Lammy, so it's no surprise that she decided, especially when there's been such a big, significant world event and the US presidency has been decided, that that's what she decided to try and pin Keir Starmer down on. As Carl said, she asked a series of questions that are almost impossible for the Prime Minister to answer, which is why he was quite evasive. She also called him out on scripted answers, which I thought was very apt for her to do. But I think the big thing here is that day one was always going to be difficult, but she enjoys the fact that there's a lot of MPs there today supporting her because it's her first appearance. She also gets the added bonus of the fact that Donald Trump has won the presidency literally just a few hours ago, so there's a lot for her to go in on. The question will be whether or not Kemi Badenoch can keep up this sort of momentum, whether her performances will be like this moving forward. It's easy to do this on a day like today where there's a lot of excitement around Westminster, but to sort of coin a phrase which is often used in football, will she be able to deliver on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of March, for example, where there's not as much excitement around Westminster, where there's not as much news? Is she going to be the same Kemi Badenoch we saw today? That's going to define her performances as leader of the opposition.
I thought it was quite clever nonetheless, though, the way she used the kind of template of what happened in America overnight to structure her questions to Mr. Starmer. I'm thinking particularly of, attacking the budget on the basis is that it was pure Bidenomics, which of course has failed the electoral test in America.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to start listing off and criticising former leaders of the opposition, but one of the things that had happened in previous years gone by is that there would be major world events or major news stories that would be developing, and sometimes leaders of the opposition would come in and ask questions on a completely different topic, something else that they thought was necessary, and often people watching would be slightly confused. You'd have a week where housing was the big story, and for some bizarre reason there'd be questions about immigration being asked. Kemi Badenoch coming in and actually focusing on what is the big news stories of the day. Donald Trump's election, but also focusing on the budget, which we've just had last week, suggests that she's going to try and keep it topical, keep it on the issues that actually matter and the ones that are in the news at the moment, which, again, should be a fruitful strategy. But like I said, this all depends on how it goes. This is only her first appearance of PMQs. She's potentially got several years ahead of her if she stays in the role and Keir Starmer stays in the role. So we'll have to wait and see how she develops, and she'll develop her own style with time. It's the same for anyone doing any job. When you come in on day one, you're excited, it's a new thing, you come in and you tend to perform with a bit of adrenaline, but as time goes on, you develop your own way of dealing with the pressures and your own way of working. So we'll see what Kemi Badenoch is like over the next few months and maybe even years.
And we saw a bit, Carl, of that combative approach that we were talking about at the start. I thought in some of Mrs. Badenoch's responses, when she dismissed Mr. Starmer's answers, discuss, chat, she said at one point.
Yeah, she's good at communicating.
It's a very colloquial way.
She's on her feet. Yeah, she's got a very punchy style, which, as I was saying before, Keir Starmer cannot match. That is just not his style. He's much more serious and slightly more verbose. And I think PMQ's rewards the punchier style, frankly, because, you know, when you're talking around an issue at greater length, you can start to look evasive. When you are being evasive, it points it up. It makes it more obvious that that's what you're doing. I think Labour were rattled. One thing that it's hard to tell when you're not in the chamber how much noise is actually going on, because, you know, the way TV and radio works, you know, it dampens down the amount of noise, the shouting from the back benches. But you could see in the number of times that the Speaker had to stop things to tell people to calm down and quieten down, that there was a lot of noise coming from the Labour benches. And I got the sense that they were quite rattled and they were trying to shout her down.
What did you, I mean, there was, of course, also a challenge for the Prime Minister today to kind of deal with a new leader of the opposition who was really going to come after him. What did you make of how Mr. Starmer responded?
As I sort of mentioned just before we went into watching PMQs, this is a whole new experience for him. His time at PMQs so far, from leader of the opposition into Prime Minister, has been very different. And now there will be a huge tonal shift in terms of what he faces from the opposite side. A more combative leader of the opposition, potentially asking slightly tougher questions, potentially coming back with quite quick remarks and trying to point out the fact that he's not answering questions in a way that he didn't have to face when he was leader of the opposition himself, and in a way he didn't have to face when Rishi Sunak was opposite him as leader of the opposition. For the Prime Minister, these are questions that are very, very difficult for him to answer, because right now his number one priority is going to be dealing with the special relationship. Donald Trump has just been elected in the US, and he will not want to say anything at all in the House of Commons today that could potentially jeopardise what is already proving to be quite a difficult relationship, given what we've seen in the last couple of months and what his Foreign Secretary had been posting on Twitter/X for quite some time. So today he had to be very careful in how he answered. That's why there was so much pivoting towards the budget at almost every opportunity. He wanted to talk about fixing the foundations. That line that Kemi Badenoch says was scripted, because that's more comfortable territory. Right. When she's asking questions about the US, he knows he can't answer, which is why it was difficult, but he probably did what he had to do as Prime Minister to make sure that he can have a smoother relationship with Trump moving forward.
Yeah, and Mr. Starmer, Carl's been occasionally criticised in the past at PMQs for perhaps not being able to think on his feet as quickly as he might do. I thought in some of his responses today, particularly in making the crack about Mrs. Badenoch criticising from reading from a script while reading from a script, that showed he was kind of up for the fight as well.
Yeah, he didn't do too badly with some of those ad libs. I mean, it was quite funny. I was very struck by how she stood up, and the first thing she said was she wanted to be a constructive leader of the opposition, which they absolutely, without fail, all do. And then within 2 minutes, it descended into the normal Punch and Judy between them. I thought, actually, one thing we haven't talked about was the points that Ed Davey raised, which are, now he raised the substance of the potential issues that between this country and a Trump-led United States, the possibility of a trade war, which would be, let's face it, would be disastrous, given not only given the state of our public finances, but given the budget that we've just had, where a lot of money, a lot of tax has been raised, and a lot of money is already being spent, raising the possibility that, you know, inflation could go up, interest rates could go up. things that could happen more if there is a trade war with the United States, and if we are caught and having to choose between looking towards America and looking towards Europe, as Ed Davies said. And then the other thing was, of course, Trump's attitude towards Ukraine. I mean, Trump has been very soft on Putin. As Ed Davies said, he called the Ukraine invasion, Trump called it genius. Now, and he has said that he will solve it on day one, and it is widely thought the only way you solve it quickly is by telling the Ukrainians that they've got to settle for giving up some of their territory. Now, unless Europe is going to go along with that, which people in Europe will find very, very hard to do, Europe is going to have to find the armaments and the funding to support Ukraine. It is going to be a very, very big ask for us to do that.
And, this Prime Minister began the session began the day paying tribute to the special relationship, but that's going to come under a real test, as you say, on Ukraine, because first time certainly that I can remember, maybe the first time since Suez, when there's been a real big difference, or there will be a real big difference in terms of foreign policy between the US and UK governments. Perhaps the Falklands is slightly different.
Potentially. I mean, a lot of this hinges on whether Trump does what he says he will do. And it can be very hard to tell with Donald Trump. I mean, we all thought in his first term that NATO was at risk. And in many ways, he forced many of the countries in NATO to raise their defence spending, and you could argue that in some ways NATO was stronger at the end of it, and he would probably say, well, that was always my negotiating strategy from the start. It's hard to know with him what he really means and what he's really going to do. And also, frankly, the United States have a lot of big domestic challenges. Is Ukraine going to be as high up the agenda for him as he seemed to indicate by saying he would solve it on day one? Don't know yet.
Shihab, is there any advantage for Kemi Badenoch in the fact that ideologically her opposition is a lot closer to the American government than the British government is?
I think there is some. I think she will be feeling encouraged by the result over in the United States. She will have seen the way in which Trump has campaigned and why it has been successful. Often the political theory is what happens in the US, often the UK follows and vice versa. And she will look and take inspiration from Donald Trump, especially as time goes on, if the Starmer-Trump relationship doesn't blossom in the way that the government wants it to. The other thing we've seen with Donald Trump is he's happy to engage with politicians in the United Kingdom who aren't in government. We've seen his relationship with Nigel Farage. He's happy to engage with Nigel Farage, even though Nigel Farage isn't in Downing Street. And look, there is that potentially presents an opportunity for Kemi Badenoch. She will be able to look at that and say, hold on, if we have ideological similarities, which they do, if she is able to forge a relationship through the statements that she makes, if she goes over to the US, if they're able to converse in a similar sort of way to the way Nigel Farage did, she may be able to form a relationship separate to the one that Keir Starmer will forge. So it's going to be quite an interesting balance to strike as time goes on. The other key thing, and Carl has already said this, but Donald Trump, the campaigner, could very potentially be very different from Donald Trump, the president. He often talks about negotiating. He often talks about the strategy, the art of the deal, as he often says. And the fact that he's saying that he's going to resolve the war in Ukraine on day one may just be a negotiating tactic. He may go in and use that to do something else. So we don't know for sure exactly what the ramifications of a US presidency under Donald Trump this time round will look like, because he will be presented with a lot of challenges on his plate. And Keir Starmer will have to react adequately to deal with that and ensure that the relationship builds, because a relationship with the US is crucial for his time as Prime Minister.
That's really interesting. I just want to touch quickly before we finish on 2 points on Kemi Badenoch. It was only touched on briefly by Ed Davey during the session, but her heritage. Carl, you and I certainly, perhaps not so much she had, but you and I certainly have grown up with a political establishment in which black faces are relatively rarely seen. Today we've seen a black person right at the centre of the political establishment. That does feel like an enormous moment. And also just on a personal level with Kemi Badenoch, we said at the start, how much she appeared to be enjoying herself. There was one very telling moment, I thought, where she raised a glass of water to her lips and you could see her hand was shaking. We shouldn't underestimate, should we, both of you, what an enormous test PMQs is for a new party leader.
Yeah, that's right. It is a big moment. Although we are seeing her at the dispatch box, or many people are seeing her at the dispatch box for the first time, of course, she has been at the dispatch box before, both, mainly as a minister, actually. She has performed in Parliament many times, but she will have known that this was a big moment for her with a lot of eyes watching her. And of course, there will have been some nerves in the background. As far as her heritage is concerned, it is a curious feature of British politics that the Conservative Party has done much, much better at having a diversity of backgrounds in its leadership than the Labour Party, which would consider itself the more progressive party. And I think some people in Labour, and we've seen that from tweets, some of which Keir Starmer was asked about today, there are some in the Labour Party who find that very difficult to accept.
Irrespective of your political allegiances, irrespective of where you stand politically, it is a significant moment that a black woman is now leading one of the UK parties in Westminster. It's another glass ceiling that has been broken. But as Carl says, the Conservative Party have a history now, especially in the last few years, of having very diverse leaders, having diverse politicians in the most significant and senior position in the greatest offices of state, whether it's the Foreign Office, whether it's the Treasury, whether it's the Home Office. They have regularly had ethnic minorities in those positions, but irrespective, it is a significant moment, and there'll be people watching at home who will see that and be inspired to enter politics, regardless of where they stand on the political spectrum, and that is a significant thing, regardless of what you believe in.
And I think where that, sorry to interrupt, where that could have a real life effect is if voters start to follow that more and more. I mean, traditionally, many ethnic minority voters have supported the Labour Party because back in the bad old days, it was the Labour Party who stood up for them more when there was a lot of racism around. But if there are more people from black and Asian backgrounds in leadership positions in the Conservative Party and representing not only what people from ethnic minorities look like, but also their interests. A lot of small business owners and so on. I think that the history that the Labour Party has amongst some communities may start to count for less, and the Conservative Party will certainly be hoping that they can attract many more voters from those communities to their way.
Right, Carl Dinnan, Shihab Khan, thank you. What a treat for me to watch PMQs with a pair of such expert witnesses. Thank you both very much indeed. That is all we have time for. We'll be back next Wednesday at 11:50 a.m. live here on ITVX. And don't forget, Tom will be back with plenty more reaction to the US election results later today with a brand new episode of Talking Politics USA, available on your favourite podcast platform and on the news section of ITVX. But for now, from all of us here, bye-bye.